Hello everyone, my name is Akal and I am a somatic therapist as well as an astrological counselor. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about what I do, you can check out my website, which I have posted down below the video. So today what I'm going to do is I'm covering Chitra Nakshatra as well as its padas or divisions. And every nakshatra has 4 divisions. The divisions in a lot of ways sort of illustrate what I perceive as the life path of this particular nakshatra. So I'll go ahead and get into that. But basically how I'm looking at this is I'm looking at this from the lens of not so much like, what the specific nakshatra is in terms of its attributes and characteristics. I'm more looking at the planetary energies, how the energies intertwine, and then how does this end up dictating the direction, the life path. So Chitra Nakshatra is interesting, and I want to start off by looking at the Gunas. The Gunas, just as a reminder, are the fundamental energies which underlie pretty much all creation. And there are 3 Gunas. One is Rajasic, which means activity. The other one is Sattvic, which basically means clarity, neutrality, that sort of that sort of energy. And then finally we have Tamasic, which is density. So anytime you think of material plane, you think of movement into density. Anytime you think about like getting in the mind, being part of man's creation, then what you want to do is you want to think about Tamasic. Tamasic doesn't necessarily mean bad. It simply means density, again. So, Chitra Nakshatra is ruled by Mars. Now, how did I figure out Mars? Tamasic energy on its secondary level and Tamasic energy, once again, on its expressed or projection level. So how this works is at its very root, this energy at its most deep subconscious level, it's material focus. On its secondary level, which represents the sort of like the negative mind. Now, what's the negative mind? The negative mind is quick, it's fast, and it's protective. So that's an attribute that is expressed with Chitra Nakshatra. So on the tertiary level, then what we have is energy which is once again Tamasic, and this energy once again is what's directed out into life. So again, Tamasic on a secondary and tertiary level equates to Mars. Now this is what's really interesting about Chitra is when you look at, you go through books or you look at different websites, what you'll see is that the energies associated with this tend to be a lot about handling and manipulating physical things. So a lot of times you see architects, artists, creative types that have this kind of energy. So, and I guess the big question mark is how is Mars related to this? Well, if you want to look at Mars, I forgot to draw it before, so I'll go ahead and draw it now. It's a circle with a slightly upward arrow. A circle with a slightly upward arrow. Now, what does that indicate? So what it indicates is, so the circle represents the whole. The arrow represents direction. So essentially what this is, so the whole, which is the energy, it's the life force from the sun, etc., moves through us, but it's not the sun that necessarily dictates our activity. What dictates our activity or how we express our activity out into the material plane is Mars. So when you think about Mars, think about instinct. I read somewhere, some book, they talked about Mars as being the first energy that's expressed when an infant is born. It's the drive to cry, to express in that way. The drive to crawl and want to move. So this energy, it's not conscious. That's the other thing we have to kind of look at here. This is not conscious energy. It doesn't mean these are unconscious people, but this is not energy that's necessarily analyzing things. Now, because and I left out. Now, because the first two padas are basically within Virgo, and the latter two padas are basically within Libra, so what we end up getting here is we get really interesting sort of contrasts. And I felt the descriptions were sort of appropriate. One of the descriptions I saw said a pig in the mud. The other description I saw is the urge to create or build. Now, as the book that I was reading said that the pig in the mud was the lesser expression, or the lower material level expression, and the urge to create or build was the sort of the higher expression. So now, a pig in the mud to me is actually quite comfortable. Pigs like being in the mud, and I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. However, what I think it's implying by that statement is that Chitra Nakshatra, again, this is energy that's sort of on autopilot and instinctual. This arrow implies, though, that it's always moving in some direction. And if you notice, it's slightly upward. So again, this Mars energy is directing them towards spirit. Now, these individuals, I've known a few of these people, they may undergo spiritual transformations that are based on, like, I don't know, ass-kicking events, we'll say. Major transformations that happen pretty intensely and pretty quickly. The sort of events that need to happen in one's life to dislodge someone from autopilot. And then that helps them sort of evolve. And I don't want to speculate as to what these events could be, but to me, they could be shocking events. They could be something that just comes along and smacks them and wakes them up and gets them to go in a different direction, or to redirect their ambitions. So this sign is pretty, it's pretty active, it's pretty ambitious, but it also can be very content. I think this reference to the lower expression being the pig in the mud would imply a contentment. So how do they become uncontent? Well, what happens is some sort of energy comes along, some sort of event comes along, and they get triggered, transformed, and then they start moving towards a higher expression. So now we have the mixture of Venus and Mercury as the sort of overarching planets, because we're dealing with Libra and Virgo. So what that means is that there is an energy of discernment here, and there's also maybe a tendency towards being, I guess, a lot of very social, wanting to connect, because Venus, as it relates to Libra, is about desire. It's about sex. A lot of Libras, I'm sorry, Libras, but y'all are hedonists sometimes. The thing about this energy is that it wants to connect with others. There's a desire to connect with others. So oftentimes we start to, when we look at Libra, let's say the 7th house in one's chart, what you look at in the 7th house is you look at the movement toward the other. All the previous 6 houses were more about the sort of evolution of the individual, the evolution of the self. And then when it gets to the 7th house, there's a shift and a change. And that's kind of what Libra represents. It's that movement towards, I guess, externalizing the energy, externalizing one's attention towards the other. So now, how does like Venus and Mercury mix with Mars? So Venus and Mercury is a mixes with Mars. I could see, when Venus and Mars would mix, you're getting interesting polarities. It's sort of a lot of self-sensuality I could see playing out with this. Mars is often associated with sex drive. Venus is associated with sexy, like sexy feeling, or that which we desire. So I can see a lot of self-sensuality with this placement. Now, if it's more on the Virgo side, then what we're looking at is, Mercury as it mixes with Mars, which to me is basically adds a level of discernment to that individual's autopilot. So I could see more sort of intense, transformational, shocking things happening on the Libra side of this as opposed to the Virgo side. And I could be wrong about that, but that's how I perceive this. So now we're going to add into the equation. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is that there are four different sort of distinct life paths or goals or outcomes. You have moksha, which represents liberation. Artha, which I believe is it's like a material level focus, discipline, that sort of thing. And then you have kama, which is desire as an outcome. And then finally you have dharma, which is sort of like one's, it's almost religiosity, or one's like sort of desire to follow right action in life. So this is a kama, that's K-A-M-A, I believe, a kama path, which again is about desire. And it makes sense with all this Venus energy. And you'll see one of the padas, in fact, the third pada is also ruled by Venus. So now what happens when we start mixing up all these planetary energies in the first pada, which is ruled by the sun? Well, what the sun will kind of do is it magnifies the expression. So these individuals are often associated with beauty and gemstones and people who might work with gemstones and all these sorts of associations with physical things. Again, we're always coming back to material expression and physical things. So what we end up here is grand projects, big expression. So if it's an architect, it's not going to build like, a tiny home. It's not going to build like something very, very, very small. It's going to build a whole community of tiny homes, perhaps, or a whole skyscraper. I don't know. The point is that the projects become about, the self-expression becomes much more magnified with this particular placement in the first pada. So now if you add into the second pada, you get this extra dose of Mercury. So now the extra dose of Mercury, I would say, is going to add another level of perfectionism. So let's use that reference again, because I believe the god who rules this placement, I don't remember the god's name, but it's like the architect of the gods. And the architect of the gods, which I think is why you constantly see the association with this as being architects and artists and that sort of thing. But when you add a little extra Mercury here, what you're going to do is you're going to get a little more vacillation between this and that. Now this vacillation between this and that, and again, because this is the Mercury as it relates to Virgo, that Mercury is about the physical things, and it's about augmenting and adjusting the physical things. And it could be like adjusting a little bit this way and a little bit that way and a little bit this way. And that's how I tend to think about Virgo. It's just these adjustments that happen to be along the way on a Virgo person's life path in order to sort of hone the trajectory along the material plane. So in this particular case, pada 2, we're going to add, I put perfect. So this is, I would say, adds an extra bit of perfection to what these individuals want to create, assuming they aren't the pig in the mud that's just completely content doing nothing, or not doing a whole lot of anything. So pada 3, Venus. Now we're going into Libra here a little more firmly. So I put relationship. Now relationship is Yogi Bhajan, who I would consider my guru. Yogi Bhajan said about the word relationship is that relationship simply means time spent. So this could be a relationship about people, in terms of like, romantic entanglements and things like that. And again, you have a lot of beauty and sensuality with this placement. So I could see, those people that were born in the third pada as having an extra drive to connect, to want to bond, to want to have relationships. But again, from the higher expression, let's say these people have been through a number of situations in life that have jarred them and shocked them out of that sort of autopilot that Mercury, or not Mercury, but Mars-like energy can express as. Then what you end up seeing is perhaps this relationship is a little more humanitarian. Perhaps this relationship is much more about charity and helping others and things along that lines, or beautifying the world for people, or whatever it may be. But you're going to see, like I said, in that third pada, just an extra emphasis on how one externalizes their energy as it relates to other people. Finally, the fourth pada, we got this extra boost of Mars. Now, this is different Mars, though. This isn't Aries Mars. Aries Mars is that sort of, ultimate initial drive, that ultimate initial burst that charges out into the world, and it's sort of slamming into things, functioning through trial and error. That is not this Mars. This particular Mars goes a little bit deeper. The word that I saw kind of tossed around several times when I was looking at the padas was mystery. And I kept thinking, why mystery? Again, this is Scorpio Mars. This is not Aries Mars. This is Scorpio Mars. Scorpio Mars is about the occulted. And I don't mean occult like, Satan or something like that. It can mean that, but what I mean is that which is hidden. So with the fourth pada, there's going to be a desire to want to go into mysteries a little bit deeper. It's to look at the material plane and to want to understand what underlies things. And again, it's sitting in Libra, so, what's the mystery beneath, human emotion and human connection? That would be one way to look at it. And I think on a negative level, you could say these are nosy people. They may want to get in other people's business. That would be another way to look at that. But again, with the higher expression I would say here is there may be an inclination to wanting to understand the material plane on a deeper level. So, for instance, let's say you're a scientist. You're working with material things, so that's very appropriate here. But let's say you want to understand the mechanics of how the material things function on a cellular level. That would be like something that the fourth pada might lend itself to, is allowing the individual to go a little bit deeper into the dynamics that exist around them. So that is the fourth pada. I believe that's all I want to talk about with Chitra Nakshatra. This is always one of my favorite ones. It's related to the star Spica, I believe is the name, which is, I believe it's a fixed star. It doesn't move, which is great because if you think about all this material energy, all this density, it's a bit fixed in nature in some ways. So, and it also happens to be this incredibly bright star, which is why you tend to see beauty with this placement. You tend to see really bright energy, that kind of thing. So those are the associations working with gemstones. Again, things that glitter and shine. So with all that said, appreciate you watching the video. Thank you much.